It's time to increase your bankroll by decreasing your daily fantasy sports learning curve. The Curve with Benny Ricciardi and Josh Kalashi starts now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Curve here at rotocurve.com. My name is Benny Ricciardi. I go by BRich11 on all the daily fantasy sites, and I'll be here to walk you through our show today. Before we start, I just wanted to get into a couple announcements. As you guys know, I had some modem problems in the last show, but we nailed the hitters on Friday. So we were on the guys like Lou Croy, Teixeira, Joey Bats, a whole bunch of guys who went yard. I wanted to give a shout out to one of our users, Seth, who had a huge night the other night, finished with an 86-point score on FanDuel, which is, one of the higher scores that I've seen, in a little while. That beats anything I've put up so far this year. So I wanted to give a shout out to him. He was very generous in thanking us for all our help. So Seth, here's your shout out for you. Great score the other night. Great night for you, buddy. Appreciate it. Moving on, I also wanted to mention to you guys, tonight's going to be the start of our head-to-head tourney here over at RotoCurve. The tournament's going to be taking places over on Fantasy Aces. Almost everybody has had a chance to speak with their opponent so far today. The two guys that we're still waiting on are Daddy Biggs and Kenny. So if you guys are out there listening, make sure you hop over into the forum and, leave your email in there so that you and your partner can hook up and play your game tonight. Also, DFS Viz, if you're around, make sure you send your email in the forum too. Your opponent was looking for your email. He didn't have it, even though you had answered that you were in already. Also, if anybody else is interested in hopping in, just in case Daddy Biggs or Kenny is not able to, get back to us in time, if anybody would like to be an alternate, make sure you throw your name in that forum too. Because if one of those two guys doesn't show up, we may need a late substitute to make sure we have a full field. So throw your name into the forum. Obviously, if this works well, we're going to do it again. Hopefully, we'll be able to grow it, make it bigger, and eventually get it to 64 teams, which is our goal, to make it kind of like the NCAA tournament and have it be a week-long event every night where guys are playing head-to-head and, everybody's sweating the games together in the forum and, in our chat and talking about their lineup choices and why they went with the guys they went with. So that's the idea here. Yes, it's a fun thing. Yes, we want to see who wins, but it's also a teaching point for us. It's something that, will get us to start a little bit of conversation about how we're building our head-to-head lineups and hopefully help everybody in the community be able to get better at doing that. So moving on from there, let's see. Let's talk about, let's get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about last night's games, a little bit about the weather, a little bit about Vegas. We'll get into some pitching options today, and then we'll talk about our hitters like we always do to round out the show. To start talking about last night's game, our man Josh Kalachi, who's running the chat right now, had a big night last night. He had a 186 on DraftKings going into the last game with Wellington Castillo still in play. So basically, I feel bad for Josh because he wound up with the goose egg from Castillo in the late game right there. When if Castillo would have done anything, I mean, every single point he would have scored would have moved Josh up another 15 or 20 places in the final standings. So he was in the top 100 of the 250K $5 knuckleball, the main super knuckleball tournament that they had on DraftKings last night. So I was really hoping he was going to get a cheap home run from Wellington there and push him up into the top 10. That would have been pretty cool to see. But basically, that actually brings me to one of the teaching points I wanted to talk about to you guys today. Daily fantasy, if you're somebody who can't deal with heartbreak, daily fantasy is probably not the sport for you. Because for every big victory that you have, for every time you finish up on top of a big tournament or you get a roster that finishes in the top 20 or top 50, you probably had 3 or 4 other ones that were right on the cusp of pushing into that range for you, and a guy or two left to play that wound up throwing up a 0. So maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 times you actually get that home run from the last guy you have on your roster who you needed to do it. When you're sitting there saying, come on, one time, please. But for the most part, you're going to have a lot of those rosters that fall short. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, even like Josh's roster last night, yes, he fell short of getting up into the top 10 by not getting anything out of Castillo. But, I mean, he still finished in the top 1 or 2% of the entire tournament and got, a pretty decent payday for a $5 investment. So that's something that, that you can't really be mad about. As long as you can get more money to stay in the game and keep playing, keep chasing after that big score. I mean, to me, that's the idea of it anyway. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Josh's roster yesterday, because his roster construction was basically the roster construction that a lot of the winners had. Josh was very heavy on the Rockies last night. And as we know, the Rockies went nuts yesterday. I think they wound up putting up, I don't know, it was 11, 12 runs, something along those lines. It might have even been more. I stopped checking the scoreboard after a while. They were a low-owned team last night because they were going up against John Lackey, who's not a horrible pitcher, but not a great pitcher at this point in his career either, which is something that I think you always have to consider. I think more people were on the St. Louis bats who really didn't do anything outside of that, late Colton Wong home run. Because of that matchup, I think people thought that, oh, well, the St. Louis has a better matchup. They're both playing in Coors. We're going to go with the Cardinals. But again, that Rockies team, Coors Field, there's a reason why the spreads are always 9, 10 runs every night in that place. That place yields a lot of hits. It yields a lot of runs. I think as of now, it's about 20% higher than league average for hits allowed. So, basically, you're going to expect more offense to come if you got that many more hits that are coming every game. So that was one that, basically wasn't too hard to pick out, wasn't too hard to see, but it required you to think a little bit differently than everybody else. The Rocky stack was a little bit of a swerve. Like we said, everybody was on St. Louis, but the people who had the Rockies were the ones who wound up towards the top of the leaderboards last night, Josh being one of them. Josh also had a really good punt play that he hit on. And this is something that we talk about all the time, is if you're going for a tournament team and you're putting a stack in there, the other guys, if you're playing on DraftKings where you can only fit in 6 and you have to pick at least 2 other guys, the other guys are what differentiates your roster. There were a couple hundred people who had the same Rocky stack that Josh had last night, but one of his other guys was Eddie Rosario. And Rosario wound up hitting a home run, finishing with 17 DraftKings points for a little over $3,000 in cost on DraftKings. So if you can get a guy like that who goes 4 or 5 times above his salary, that's basically going to be the kind of guy who can save your team and really put you up towards the top of one of those leaderboards. Let's see. So moving on from there, we had some good pitching last night. Obviously, fading Sale was not the way to go. Chris Sale had a huge game, and if you didn't have him, you probably wouldn't get up there. But there is some merit into fading Sale. Before the game started, I was actually having a Twitter discussion that some people joined in with JM to Win, who's a guy whose writings I read all the time. He's a really good fantasy player, really smart fantasy mind, and a great writer. And him and I were both kind of in agreement. When you have a guy like Sale, who's clearly the number one option on the board last night, you knew he was going to be incredibly highly owned. Now, if playing in cash games, and you guys have heard me say, you don't get fade a stud in a cash game. In a cash game, Sale was definitely the guy that you should have had in your lineup. You should have built your lineup around him, found another pitcher that you liked, and then put in some bats. That was the way to go. That was the way to build the cash game team last night. If you're on a 2-pitcher site, if you're on a 1-pitcher site like FanDuel, putting Sale on top, in a cash game was the right thing, the right play to make. If you did that, he got you 25, 26 points. I mean, he almost got you to the cash line all by himself last night. So if you faded him last night in your cash games, that's not the way to do it. Now, if you faded him in your tournaments, yes, it didn't work out, but you understand the thinking that's needed in order to win a tournament. As JM was pointing out, if you faded a guy like Sale, and Sale was 60, 70% owned in some spots in some of the smaller pool tournaments, if you faded that guy and he does have a bad game, well, you're basically in the money right now. If Sale would have had that negative game yesterday, you would have had 70% of rosters with a negative score on it. Now, again, it's not – obviously, he was the best pitcher on the day, and he was probably the guy who was expected to be. But the idea is that if you want to win a tournament, you have to do something a little bit different than what, everybody else in the masses is. Minimum cashes in tournaments can be fine with a guy like Sale, even on a bad night. But if you really want to get that top roster, you got to try to go away from what the crowd is doing. But again, it's not always advantageous to fade the best pitcher on the day. And when he pitches like the best pitcher on the day, your roster gets sunk. So even though there was merit in doing it yesterday and it didn't work, it's still something that you should keep in mind in the future if you get another chance to, fade a big stud like that. So that's basically our recap of yesterday. The only other pitcher I wanted to mention was Shelby Miller. He had a pretty good game yesterday, about 22 fantasy points. Would have been higher if his bullpen didn't blow the lead for him. But he made just under 3 points per thousand of cost, which is basically the benchmark we look for. If he would have been able to get that win, he would have been over the 3 times mark. So Shelby Miller and Sale was a very good pitching option, one that we saw on the top of a couple winners last night, and probably the best way to go. Moving on today to potential weather issues, there's really only one game to look at. Atlanta has about a 60% chance of showers. It looks like they're saying there's a good chance they could play. But again, as I always say to you guys, I'm not a meteorologist. And because of that, what we did here at RotoCurve is we went out and hired a meteorologist. So for those of you who don't know, Danielle Kozlowski has started working for us last week. She's going to be giving updates on the weather for the games every night for the rest of the season. So make sure you guys check back. It usually comes in sometime around 6 o'clock before, 5:30, 6 o'clock before Rath comes on and does his late DFS minute, gives you some of the value plays on that. So if you guys aren't following her, go over to Twitter. Her Twitter handle is @WeatherDFS. So give her a follow. You can send her some questions. She's very, happy to oblige everybody and let you know what she's thinking and what she sees. And she's also going to be doing some videos every night for us, where she basically lays out the map and shows you guys how the storms are moving and the, what time they're expecting everything to clear up, whether or not games are going to be able to get in. So it's a very valuable tool for you guys, especially if you're playing in cash games. Because again, whenever there's a chance of a game not playing, we always tell you, make sure you get those guys out of your lineup so you can't get those zeros. Otherwise, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be losing money, and that's not the idea. So moving on, let's take a look at some of the Vegas lines today. We got the biggest one on the board. The one that jumped out at me right away is Miami and Toronto. It's at a 9.5 right now. And Burley is a -146 favorite over Dan Herron. So basically, Vegas is expecting a lot of runs to come out of that Blue Jays team today. And to me, that's kind of surprising because in everything I'm looking at and reading and in all the research I've done this morning, not too many of the Blue Jays bats have really jumped out at me. As long as you got a guy like Colabello hitting cleanup at 3,400, he's going to be somebody who's in play. I didn't look at his price today, but until they raise that price on him, if he's still hitting cleanup in that batting order in that stadium, he's a guy that's going to be in play. Joey Bats has been hot. He's been hitting home runs. He's going to be a guy that's in play. Donaldson is usually someone we like to see against left-handed pitching, but he's been hitting righties well this year too. So they do have a lot of run-scoring potential up there. But like I said, I try to point out stuff that seemed out of whack to me, and that was the first thing that jumped off the page at me. So if you haven't looked at any of those Toronto bats today, it might be something that you might want to go back and check on. The second big run game is obviously there's a game in Coors Field, St. Louis and Colorado. But this one was interesting to me too. The spread on this game is 10, but Michael Wacha is only a -130 favorite. I would have figured Wacha would have been a bigger favorite in this game today. So I think that the way that those Colorado bats have been hitting has Vegas thinking that, there's going to be some runs on both sides of this game. So what that really tells me here is that I probably don't want to be using a guy like Wacha today. Not that many people were thinking about it, but if you were thinking he might be somebody you want to try to get cute with, I don't think this is the spot you really want to mess around with. The last game that has a good spread on it to look at is Minnesota and Kansas City. It's an 8.5 spread in this game. I'm sorry, 8.5 run line in this game. And I didn't really expect this game to be the third highest total on the day. So when I saw that, I was a little bit taken back. But basically, I'm chalking it up to the fact that there are so many aces on the mound today that some games in stadiums where they usually have 8 or 9 run lines are probably seeing 7 and 7.5 run lines. There's really only 3 games, the 3 that we just mentioned, that are over 7.5 today. So those are some places that you might want to go back and take a look at and see if there's a couple bats that you might want to include with your rosters. Moving on to pitching favorites, Liriano is the biggest favorite on the board at -210. Goes up against the Brewers. I absolutely love him today, and we'll discuss him in a minute when we get to the starting pitcher section. But he is far and away the biggest favorite on the board at -210 against the rookie. Second biggest favorite is Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray is -190 going up against Texas. I was a little surprised that he's the second biggest favorite on the board. Nick Martinez is the guy who he's going up against. Martinez has been solid so far this year, but he's not really a great pitcher. Gray is somebody who I think is flying a little bit under the radar so far. You're hearing a lot of people mention some of the other names like Kluber, like Liriano, like guys that are cheap, like Rodon today, Rodon, however you say his name. He's somebody who is basically flying under the radar, though. I mean, Gray's been as good as anybody else in the league so far this year. Pitching in Oakland, great pitcher's park, so there's a lot of upside to him as well. So Sonny Gray is another one of those guys that, might be sneaky, might be under the radar for you. The third biggest favorite really surprised me, and that was Carlos Frias. Carlos Frias is a -155 over the Rays today. The Dodgers can actually get right-handed now, which had been a problem for them. So people are expecting Robbie Ray to have a really good game. I know Rath mentioned him this morning, and Rath and I are usually in agreement on a lot of this stuff, but I actually have a couple Dodgers bats that I want to be targeting today. So I'm not really looking for Robbie Ray to have a good game. Vegas agrees with me. They have him as a -155 favorite. The game is being played in Dodger Stadium, so we're not expecting a ton of runs, But, I mean, Robbie Ray, if you remember last year, he's a guy that pitched for Detroit. He had a couple good starts, and then he had a couple other starts where he just got, just completely lit up, like 6 or 7 runs in the first 4 innings or something like that. And, I mean, there's a lot of big bats in this Dodgers lineup. With a guy like Puig back right now, you can get right-handed with Puig, with Kendricks, a guy like Justin Turner, who's been great so far this year. Jock Peterson and Adrian Gonzalez have actually hit left-handers pretty well. So I don't really think that I fear a left-hander going up against the Dodgers, even though that some of the stats you see are going to say that. Even a guy like Alex Guerrero, who could be, down in the order somewhere, playing the outfield, batting 6th or 7th, hits very well against left-handed pitching. So I think that the Dodgers, now that they're a little bit healthier, have enough right-handed bats that they can throw into this lineup to, kind of turn it around a little bit and make some noise today. So let's move on. Let's talk about starting pitchers. Like I said, my favorite pitcher on the day is Francisco Liriano going up against the Milwaukee Brewers. He has the best combination of price, recent performance, and upside for me today. In his last 19 innings, he's given up 13 hits, 4 walks, only 2 earned runs, and has struck out 29 batters in his last 19 innings. So he's going a little bit less than 7 innings a game, but he's striking out pretty much close to 10 batters. Now, he faces a Milwaukee team that has a 194 batting average against and basically is second in the league in strikeouts against left-handed pitching. They strike out at a 23.3% clip against left-handed pitching. So you got Liriano in a matchup against a team that struggles to hit left-handers and strikes out a lot against left-handers. So that puts him in line for a game with, a lot of strikeouts for positives and very few negatives if he's not going to be giving up that many hits. He's pitching at home in a good friendly pitcher's park. And he goes opposite a kid who they're bringing up today that was in AAA and had an ERA of 5. Now, in his defense, he plays in that, Pacific Coast League where, the balls fly out of all those ballparks, which only makes what Matt Harvey did down there with an ERA of like 2 all the more amazing. So don't put too much into the fact that this kid got lit up that bad. He's actually been pitching pretty well lately, and he's supposed to be a pretty decent prospect for them. But again, I mean, he's a rookie pitcher coming up from AAA to pitch in the majors. Sometimes that works in his favor. Sometimes it works against him. I mean, we've seen guys come up and throw gems in their first start, and we've seen guys come up and get lit up and not even make it through the 3rd inning. So it could go either way here, but the more important thing to me is Liriano against that Milwaukee team is going to be able to limit them. As we said, they really have been bad so far this year against left-handed pitching. Even with a guy like Lucroy back right now, which might help him out. You got a banged-up Ryan Braun. There's just not a lot that I like there in that order. So Liriano is going to be the top guy for me. Again, he's the biggest favorite at -210, 7.5 run line in that game. And he's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings at only 9,700 than some of the guys like a Kluber, who I think will be more highly owned. So I think that he's a good guy to use in both cash and GPP plays today. The next guy I wanted to mention is Corey Kluber. I mean, let's face it, as much as I like Liriano, I'm not going to tell anybody not to play Kluber today. He's got a 30.6% K rate, which right now is the highest ever. I mean, he has basically just been mowing guys down. And the thing is, he's been pitching deep into games. He has a batting average of balls in play right now of 357. Now, that's a high number, which means that regression is likely to come because the number that he has over his career is much lower than that. And 357 is a huge number. I mean, he basically everybody who's, over 1/3 of the balls getting put in play are winding up as hits against him. And, normally that number is much, much further down into the low 200s. So he could have a lot of, we'll call it progression instead of regression because he's going to be getting better in that stat. So that's a good sign for him as well. He's favored in the game with only an over-under of 7. And Seattle has really struggled versus right-handed pitching. And, Josh, my partner, actually pointed something out to me today. He said, Trumbo's a high strikeout guy. So you have a team that was already one of the highest strikeout teams against right-handed pitching, and you're throwing in a guy like Trumbo, who's a high strikeout guy. I mean, it's only going to get worse, the numbers. So with Trumbo in that lineup, there's even more potential for Kluber to have a big K game. So you got a team that strikes out a lot against probably the best strikeout pitcher we have in the game right now, statistically. There's definitely a lot of upside to using him today. Now, his price is pretty high, but again, the strikeouts give you a nice floor, as we always talk about. And the thing about Kluber lately is he's been pitching into the 8th inning of games. He's been going 7, 8, 9 innings in every one of his starts. So if he's going to go that deep, wind up with 10 strikeouts for you, he's going to be able to pay off that number if he keeps doing what he's doing and limiting the runs and the exposure that he's been giving up. So if he keeps those negatives down, he's going to have a great upside game again today. Moving on from him, the next guy I want to talk about is Carlos Rodon. Rodon is going up against the Astros. Now, I had to go back and triple check the stats because when I saw his price on DraftKings, I was like, no, that can't be right. Am I thinking of the same guy? But basically, Rodon is a left-handed rookie, a lot in the same mold as Chris Sale. And we all saw last night what Chris Sale was able to do to that Houston Astros team. Wound up with 14 strikeouts. I think he only gave up about 3 hits, went 8 innings. So the Astros are really struggling against left-handed batters. Against left-handed pitchers. Let me see if I can get the stats here. I think I have them down. They're the 2nd worst in K percentage against left-handers and the 8th worst batting average overall against left-handed pitching. So you're taking a kid like Rodon and you're putting him in a really good matchup tomorrow. Basically, he averages about a K per inning. He also gives up a lot of walks, though. So when you have a high strikeout pitcher that also gives up a lot of walks, tends to throw a lot of pitches. So he doesn't get through more than maybe 6 innings of a game, but he's been striking out about a batter per inning, a little bit over that. And he's already had games where he's had 8 and 10 strikeouts in only 6 innings. And the reason I say that is, again, when we talk about strikeouts creating that floor for you, at only 5,700 on DraftKings, he basically needs to get you about 16 points. So if he can get anywhere near a strikeout per inning, if he doesn't give up more than 4 or 5 runs or more than 10 hits, he's going to return value for you. And that doesn't even factor in the fact that, he might be able to get a win, although he is going up in a tough matchup tomorrow. And that brings me to the next guy I wanted to talk about, which is that tough matchup, and that's Dallas Keuchel. Keuchel's got a 22.8% K rate. He has he goes up against the White Sox, who have a 22.8% K rate. So they're about 7th against left-handed pitching in the league. And their batting average against left-handed pitching is 29th. They're only hitting .203 against left-handed pitching. So this is a great matchup, again, for Keuchel, another left-hander. Keuchel has a really high ground ball rate. That's what makes him a really good pitcher. And it also allows him to pitch deep into the games. The reason why he's been so good lately is he's also been able to dial up the strikeouts. Right now, in 5 of his last 10, he's had at least 7 strikeouts. And 2 games ago, he flashed huge strikeout potential when he struck out 11 guys. So if you get the strikeouts from a guy like Keuchel, who's going to go deep into the game because he's inducing a lot of those ground balls and keeping the pitch count down, you're going to wind up with high innings, high strikeouts, and a good potential for a win without too many hits that he doesn't give up and without too many runs, which he also hasn't been giving up. So if you can get big positive numbers and all the things that you get positive points for, and you can limit the negatives from him, plus you're getting him deep in the game and he can get a win, he can easily pay off his salary. Already this season, he's had about 4 or 5 starts where he's been to a number that would make his salary today a good value proposition for him. So in a good matchup today, I think there's a chance he can get back up there again. And he's going to be somebody who flies a little bit under the radar because people still think of him as a guy with low strikeout numbers. But so far this year, he's been dialing up the strikeouts. Now, again, he's not a Corey Kluber. He's not going to go out there and K 10 guys on a consistent basis. But if he can get you 6 or 7 and go 8 innings, with a win, you're going to be pretty happy with the return that you get from him today. The last guy I want to mention is somebody who I just want to give everybody a little bit of pause on. I'm not saying don't use him because he's been great, and I'm also not going to put him in the category of guys who I'm going to target against. But Eddie Rodriguez for Boston has had 2 starts so far where he's averaged about 30 DraftKings points. So if you just look at the game logs, you're going to think that this guy's lights out and you have to use him. He's got a pretty explosive slider. He's got a good fastball, nice changeup. So he's got a good mix of pitches, and the kid seems to have an idea of how to pitch and how to get batters out at the major league level. Now, the problem I have today is he's going up against Baltimore, who's actually pretty good against left-handed pitching. Baltimore has the 7th best batting average in the league against lefties, and they're 20th for K percentage. So this is a team that doesn't strike out a lot and does actually hit the ball pretty well against left-handed pitching. So just kind of cool your jets a little bit on Rodriguez today. I still like the kid. His price isn't too much. He's only $7,000, I think, on DraftKings. So there is still a chance he can get you to that 20-point mark. But again, I just think that there's a little bit more risk to using him today. And I would have to say he's only a guy that I think you should roll out in a GPP. I don't think that he's somebody you can play in your cash games today because there is a chance that those Baltimore bats in Camden Yards just knock him around a little bit. or at the very least that he doesn't reach, the kind of value that you're looking for, the 25, 30-point range to give you huge upside. So that basically breaks down our pitching for today. We're going to get into some of the talk about our hitters. There's a couple guys who stand out to me, and there's a couple really tough positions today that I think I'm going to wind up waiting till lineups come out and see if I can find some value at. And the first one of those is catcher. I absolutely hate catcher today. You have bad matchups at the top for a lot of the good players that we usually use, and you have bad splits matchups for the guys who actually are, going up against a pitcher who I wouldn't mind targeting against. Probably my favorite catching option on the day is going to be Stephen Vogt. He hasn't been great lately. He has a thumb injury, and he's basically 0 for his last 9 and over the last 2 games. But he does get a good matchup. He's going up against Nick Martinez. Left-handers have been the way to attack Nick Martinez. But even this actually gives me a little bit of pause because for some reason Martinez this year has been really tough on left-handed batters. He's normally not, but I don't know if he's throwing a different pitch. I mean, Josh might be able to give you guys in chat a little bit more of a breakdown on why that would be. But like I said, for some reason, Martinez's numbers against left-handed batters this year are just really, really good. But again, I really don't like the splits matchup for anybody. I really don't like any of the catchers all that much today. There's a lot of guys going up against some really good pitchers with all the aces we have on the mound. So, Stephen Vogt is the guy I have in most of my lineups right now, but I consider him to be kind of a placeholder because if I find somebody cheaper later who makes sense, batting in a good spot, I definitely think I could be persuaded very easily into coming off a Vogt and coming on to somebody else. So we're going to move on to some of the other positions that I do like guys a lot better at. So at first base, I think Anthony Rizzo is somebody who's in play again. He has the highest base on ball percentage and the lowest K percentage of all the first basemen who are basically priced above $4,000. He's a solid cash game play, and he has GPP upside in almost any matchup. Now, the thing that I like about Rizzo is he seems to be heating up right now. He has a hit in each of his last 10 games, and in his last 4 games, he's had multiple hits. So he's had at least 2 hits in each of his last 4 games. And he gets a pretty good matchup today against Anibal Sanchez, who I think is going to scare some people away. But if you look at Sanchez's numbers lately, he's given up 20 earned runs over the last 23 innings of his last 4 starts. So this isn't a guy who you should be, running away from. This is a guy who you should be targeting against. And throughout his career, Sanchez has always struggled more with left-handed power bats. And, Anthony Rizzo is basically a left-handed power bat. So this is exactly the kind of matchup that you want against a guy like Sanchez who's really struggling. If you're looking to go cheap at first base, I think Mark Reynolds is the guy you got to look at today. We all had Holiday go down with that injury yesterday. So that leaves Reynolds as one of the best right-handed hitting power bats that they have left in St. Louis. And basically, they're going up in Coors Field. You should probably see a guy like Reynolds hitting in the 4-hole. He might be in the 5-hole with Peralta in the 4 if they decide to move somebody else up top and move Wong and Carpenter down in that order. But for the most part, you're going to see Reynolds right in the middle of that lineup with a couple guys in front of him. De La Rosa is horrible at home. He's got about an 8.44 ERA in Coors Field, and his whip in Coors Field is over 1.5. So if you're going to get Reynolds up with a couple guys in front of him in a great ballpark to hit and a good splits matchup in the lefty-righty, I definitely think he's the cheap option that you're going to want to look at if you're going for first baseman. I didn't look at his price on FanDuel today, but I assume he's somewhere in the 2,000 range. And on DraftKings, he's 3,100. So if you need to save money at first base in order to fit in a couple stud pitchers or some of the bigger bats in the outfield, Reynolds is a guy I think you can definitely go with today. You will get no arguments from me. I think he's in a good spot. I think he has a good upside, and I think he has a great price. Second base is another one of those positions that's a little bit weak. The 2 guys I seem to be gravitating towards, especially on DraftKings, are Howie Kendricks and Neil Walker. Kendricks has been batting cleanup lately for that Dodgers order. He's going up against the left-hander Robbie Reyes, so he has his preferred split today. I think he's going to wind up somewhere around that 4-hole again. You don't know with Puig back exactly how that lineup is going to be. There's been some weird lineup construction and some pretty weird things that have been done by Don Mattingly lately. You may see Puig in the 2-hole with Gonzalez behind him, Peterson in front of him, and then a guy like Kendrick or a guy like Turner in like the 4 or 5 spot. That seems to be the way I think he's going to wind up going with it. But if you can get Kendrick, he's somebody that I think you should put in there. Again, in 2014, Robbie Ray was a guy that we targeted against in daily fantasy a lot when he was pitching in Detroit. So even though he had a great first start, I think he's due for some regression today, and I would have no problem taking any of those right-handed Dodgers bats and throwing them in my lineups tonight. After Howie Kendrick, we go to a guy like Neil Walker. Now, Walker is going to be hitting top 5 in that order. He's a switch hitter who prefers to hit against right-handed pitching, especially in that home hitter's park that he has. He's got a good matchup today, and his price has been discounted because he's been getting some days off. They're trying to fit everybody into that order now. Guys like Jordy Mercer and Kang, they're switching time with Alvarez at third base, at second base, at shortstop. So all those guys have been getting a few more off days, and the price on all of them has come down. So make sure you look at the lineup before the game starts. But if you see Neil Walker hitting in the 2-hole or hitting in the 5-hole in that order, I definitely think he's a guy you can take a flyer on at only 3,700 on DraftKings. And I think he's he's below 3,000 now on FanDuel. So at the beginning of the season, he was a $3,600 hitter on FanDuel. And, a guy who got up as high as like 45 on DraftKings. So if you can get that guy at a discount in a good matchup today, I think he's someone you might want to look at as well. Excuse me. Moving on to third base. There's a couple third basemen that I like. The top guy is going to be Melky Cabrera. Now, Cabrera hasn't had that real breakout game anytime recently, but this guy's as solid and consistent as he comes. He's averaging about 7 points per contest over his last 10, which, again, doesn't sound like a big number. But, again, he hasn't had those big 20, 25-point games and a bunch of zeros. It's been 3 points, 5 points, 10 points, 7 points, 7 points, 8 points. So he's getting you a good, solid cash game return, even though he hasn't showed the GPP upside that we'd like to see. Now, I do think that he has a good chance to outperform today. He has a long track record of hitting well against left-handed pitching. He's at 300 this season, was 301 last season, 368 in 2013, 314 in 2012. So Lester has been a guy who's been a little bit worse to right-handed batters over the course of his career. So you're taking a guy who struggles a little more with right-handed batters, and you're taking one of the best right-handed batters in the game who's been crushing lefties for a long time. And when you put them together, I think that there's a good chance that Miggy could outperform. And the real thing that I like and has been drawing me to him is because they consider this a tough matchup with Lester, his price has dropped. I mean, he was up around 52, 53,000 last week on DraftKings. And now he's down to only 4,600. So if you're going to be getting a price break on a guy with Miggy's talent, you're basically getting a 15, almost 20% discount on him today. I definitely think that's something that you should look into. Moving on, if you need a cheap third base option, Brock Holt for the Red Sox has been playing really, really well. He's only 3,200 over on DraftKings, and in 4 of his last 5 games, he's had at least 9 points over there. So as long as he stays in that 2-hole, basically hitting in front of guys, hitting behind Pedroia and in front of guys like David Ortiz and Hanley Ramirez, he's going to be able to keep putting up numbers. He's a guy who is a left-handed bat that hits really well against right-handed pitching. And if you remember, he was actually their leadoff batter for some parts of last year. And he was doing pretty well. I mean, his average was up around 300 for the season. He wasn't a bad player. He just got lost in the shuffle when they went out and signed all these big-name free agents. But it looks like they're trying to work him back into the order more. And so far, it's been working out pretty well. As long as he's getting on in front of some of those big bats, and again, at a price of only 3,200, he doesn't need to do much. He's got scores of like 9, 10, 15, 18 in his last 5 games. So this is a guy that can give you both the upside and the safety that you need for a cash or a tournament play if you're looking to save a little salary to get some of the big bats you want. At shortstop, I'm going to stay with the Red Sox. Hanley Ramirez is my favorite play today, and I'm just going to kind of break it down for you this way. Look at the top 4 guys price-wise at shortstop. To me, they're head and shoulders above everybody else. So that's where you got to look for your play today. You have Tulo, Hanley, Johnny Peralta, and Jose Reyes. Now, Tulo's got a tough matchup with Waka, and he's getting very pricey. I mean, he's up to 5,500, so he's almost 20% more expensive than the rest of the guys that we're going to talk about here. Now, again, he's been on fire. I think he's like 15 of his last 28 with 6 home runs or something crazy like that. But Waka's not a horrible pitcher. Do I think Tulo can still have a pretty solid game? Yes, but I don't think that he's the most statistically likely to do so, and that's why I'm kind of fading away from him today. If you have the money to spend and you can fit him in your roster, the way the guy's been hitting, you're not gonna get any arguments against it from me. But I just think that his price has gotten to the point, and he's been so hot, and he's drawn so much attention that now might be the time to start backing off of him. Moving on from him, you have Johnny Peralta. All right, let's go to Jose Reyes first. Actually, Reyes is a guy who can do a lot of things on a baseball field. And again, they're expecting a lot of runs out of that Toronto team today. So if you wanted to use Reyes, I'm not going to argue with you. The thing to me is, though, I want to try to get some power out of the shortstop position. And Reyes can do a lot of things, but providing power is not really one of them. Again, they're going up against a righty today, so that does increase the stolen base potential. But he hasn't been running like he has been in years past. So if you're basically just going to give me a kind of a slap hitter for the same price that I can get a Hanley Ramirez for, you know, I'm not going to be hopping onto the slap hitter if he's not going to be stealing bases as well. The other guy who's the same price as Hanley is Johnny Peralta. Now, he has a good matchup, righty-lefty. He's in Coors Field where, you know, basically is where you want to hit. But Hanley Ramirez is just a better player than Johnny Peralta is. So if I'm going to pay $4,800 for a shortstop, and those are the two guys that I'm choosing from, to me, it's going to be Hanley Ramirez almost every time, unless that he really, really has a tough matchup. And the matchup that he has today is not all that tough. He goes up against Miguel Gonzalez. Now, Gonzalez has been very good at home in Camden Yards lately. I give you all that. But Camden is a good place for home run hitters to hit. And Gonzalez in his past has also had a home run problem. So if you can give me a guy who has a home run problem against a home run hitter in a good home run park, you know, those are all the things that I look for. So I think Hanley's definitely somebody that I want in my lineups if I can fit him. If I need a cheap option, I'm going to stick with the guy I've been rolling with all week, and that's Ruben Tejada. As long as he stays in that 2-hole for the Mets, and as long as his price stays down here at $3,100 on DraftKings, where it is again today, I mean, there's no reason not to roll him out. He has at least 7 points in 8 of his last 10 games and has averaged 8.5 points over that stretch. So at $3,100, I mean, you really can't go wrong using a guy like this and plugging him into your lineup. He doesn't have the greatest matchup today, but it's not the worst one either. He does get he does play in the tough park, and that Citi Field Park is not something that yields a lot of hits or runs. But again, it's a good place for for him lately, so you really can't complain. Moving on to the outfield, you got a guy like Giancarlo Stanton. Stanton is going up against Burley. Now, Burley's been great lately. If you haven't looked at this guy's game log, I mean, he's given you 8 or 9 innings in every one of his last 4 starts. His strikeouts aren't that high, but he's been limiting walks. He's been limiting hits. He's been limiting runs. He's been putting up some really nice fantasy scores on any site that you're playing on. With that being said, though, one thing Giancarlo Stanton does very well is hit home runs, and it does is allow home runs to be hit. Now, Stanton has 5 homers and only 38 at-bats against left-handed pitching already. This is basically hitting home runs at better than a 1-in-8 clip against left-handed pitching. Now, last year, he hit .363 against lefties with 7 home runs and 108 at-bats. So Stanton has been hitting left-handed pitching well for a long time. And again, you're putting him in a really good hitter's park here today. Now, I know Burley's been pretty good, and Burley's a crafty veteran, so he's probably going to try to pitch away from this guy and pitch around him. So I think he's cash game safe because worst case scenario, you're probably going to wind up with a couple walks. And he obviously has GPP upside because if Burley's in a position of this guy, it's a great matchup that favors Stanton. So I think Stanton is somebody who I'm going to be trying to get in my lineups. And plus, the guy's been hot lately. I think he has 7 double-digit DraftKings scores in his last 10 games. So if you can get a guy who 70% of the time is getting you a double-digit score, that's somebody that you're going to need in your lineup, whether it's a cash or a GPP play. Moving on from him, a couple other guys I've been looking at. Yasiel Puig came back. This is going to be his 3rd game. He has 3 hits and 7 at-bats since coming back. And again, like I said, you want those right-handed bats who can smash left-handed pitching, and that's something that Puig does very well. So far in 2015, obviously very limited sample size, but he's 5-12 against left-handed pitching. And when they do play left-handers, he usually finds himself up at top of the order in that 2-hole, hitting right in front of Adrian Gonzalez and probably right behind Jock Peterson right now. Peterson wasn't playing earlier in the year when Puig was, but that's a lot of power to put back into that lineup now if you got those 2 guys in your outfield. The other guy I'm really looking at is Josh Reddick. Reddick smashes right-handed pitching as a left-handed batter. So far this year, he's .371 with 9 doubles, 2 triples, and 8 home runs against right-handers and only 140 plate appearances. I mean, those are MVP caliber numbers. If you could stretch that out throughout a season, you would have a guy, basically, if you stretch that out throughout an entire season, he would have a guy hitting .370 that would finish with 40 doubles, 10 triples, and 32 home runs. So, basically when you see Reddick against a right-hander, it's something you got to take note of. He's only 4,400. He hasn't been hitting really well lately, but basically that whole A's order has struggled a little bit. But in a matchup that's this good for Reddick, when this guy's healthy, I use him often. His biggest knock has always been that he never plays 150 games in a season. But, even in 110 or 120 games, this guy's production is enough that, he makes him a guy that you would want on your season-long team. And when he's healthy, he's definitely a guy you want in your daily fantasy rosters. So that moves us down to my value play at outfield. Now, this one is something that you guys have heard me say a lot, and it's somebody who I'm going to be rolling out there again today. There's a left-handed pitcher going up against the Cleveland Indians, so Ryan Raburn is definitely in play. Anytime Raburn is going up against a lefty, that's what he does. He smashes left-handed pitching. And the Indians are very left-handed, so they need him to smash left-handed pitching. They usually wind up putting him in a cleanup spot or in the 5 hole in that order. So if you can get Raburn in the 4 or 5 spot in that order, that's exactly what the doctor ordered. And again, his price on DraftKings is only $2,600. I didn't look on FanDuel, but I'm guessing he's probably $2,200 or $2,400 over there. And it's probably around the $4,000 mark on Aces. So Raburn is definitely one of those guys you want to look into for a day like today. Anytime goes up against left-handed pitching, he's somebody who you got to play. So that pretty much sums up the analysis for today. I'm going to give you guys my ideas of, how I'm building my roster and how I think it makes sense to do so tonight. In cash games, I'm going to be using a lot of Liriano and Kluber. I think Liriano and Kluber are two of the studs that are going to have some big numbers today. So you can lock in 45 to 65 points by putting those two guys on top of your rosters. I'm kicking around one other idea, and that is whether or not I want to use Carlos Rodon in cash today. That's something that I think we're going to be discussing in chat later on for the Curve show. So if you guys want to hop over to Roto in the chat, you can hear a lot of our players, a lot of people in the community, their opinion on it, and I'm actually looking forward to hearing Josh's opinion on it because, like I said, the numbers jump out at me. It almost seems too good to be true. And I'm just wondering if I'm overthinking the fact that he should be in every one of my lineups. With that being said, for tournaments, I'm definitely going to be rolling out some Rodon at 5,700. It opens me up to get some really, really big bats into my lineup. I'm going to have a little bit of them with Liriano, a little bit of them with Kluber. And again, at 5,700, you can take another guy that's 10K, put the two of them together, and still have so much money left over. I mean, you could basically get a bat at every position that's at least 4,500 if you do that. The way I would like to do it is probably go and get 3 or 4 of those $5,000 bats and put them in my lineup, and then get some good value guys. If you use a guy like Raburn at 2,600 on DraftKings today with Rodon as one of your pitchers, you could probably fit $4,000 or $5,000 bats into your lineup and have the other guys that you put in there still be solid, $3,600, $3,800, $3,900 type players, where you don't really feel like you're taking any real flyers. The only real flyer in that lineup would be the Rodon and Raburn, who we already said are two of the guys that are in the best spots. As a matter of fact, I think Josh might be writing those two guys up in the in the value article for today, because him and I spoke about both of them before the show, and they just stand out values today, guys that in your cash game lineups. So moving on from there, the bats that I'm going to be looking at, Stanton is somebody who I'm going to have in a lot of my lineups. Puig is somebody else who I want in my lineups. If I can only fit one of them, though, because they're both pretty expensive, it's obviously going to be Stanton for me. But I really like the spot that Puig is in, too. I want to pay up at first base. I really like Rizzo. The problem with paying up at first base is I think Mark Reynolds is in a great spot, too, and he's going to be hitting cleanup. But I think that there's going to be a ton of people on him because that's a very easy narrative to understand and see with him playing in Coors Field. So I think the move today might actually be to pay up at first base and, forgo the cheap value with Reynolds for your tournaments. In your cash games, if Reynolds is 3,100, he's tough to ignore in cash if you need a salary saving option with upside somewhere. I think today, the infield cheap bats today are much better than a cheap bat you can find in the outfield. So I think the way to go today is actually paying up in the outfield for some of the guys that we mentioned already today. Obviously other than Raburn, he's the one, the one punt play in the outfield that I definitely like. But you can get guys like Reynolds, guys like Justin Turner, guys like Ruben Tejada. I mean, these are very cheap bats, guys who are like right around that $3,000 price range on DraftKings. It's not too often that you get to find infield stud bats that are right around that range that you really want in your lineup. So today, I think outfield is the place you want to spend up. Some of those infielders are cheap enough that you can put them in there for salary savers that have good upside and solid floors for you. So the spots where I think you need to pay up are really going to be in the outfield, because I see some outfielders with big upside today, and I don't see a lot of the cheap outfielders with a good chance to give you a nice number today that are pretty safe. So spending up in outfield is the way to go. Taking some of those cheap infielders is probably the way to get yourself there. So that pretty much sums up our analysis for today. Again, I just want to mention all you guys in the head-to-head tournament, if you haven't had a chance to go over to the forum and, introduce yourself to your opponent and make sure you guys exchange emails, make sure you do that. Make sure you get those games set up. And once the lineup's locked, make sure you post that game in the lobby. This way everybody else can sweat it along with you, and we can talk about the lineup construction, who guys went with, who guys faded away, and, kind of give everybody who's playing and even the people who aren't involved in the tournament a good idea on how our lineup construction process and thought process for it went. This way we could all help each other become, better cash game players. So as always, we'll be here tomorrow at noon with the Curve, 12 o'clock Eastern. You can follow us over at RotoCurve on Twitter. My name's Benny Ricciardi. You can follow me at BennyR11 on Twitter, or Josh Kalachi, who's at Josh Kalachi on Twitter. If you have any questions, feel free to hop over to the rotocurve.com website. Open up the chat box in the little right-hand corner, and you'll see, guys like Rath, like Josh, like myself, and a lot of the other guys in the community over there, talking about MLB DFS and working through all this stuff so we can get some winning rosters. So good luck tonight, everybody. I hope you all win, and make sure you guys stay classy DFS. Be good.